Very. Staubus, Sullivan County District Attorney General is next, and we'll be right back to hear you. Thank you.
I really appreciate the opportunity to be here today to speak about this topic. And when I was asked to do it, I don't usually think in terms of economic impact of domestic violence. As a prosecutor, we think about the impact in terms of on the legal system. We look at the emotional, psychological, and social impact that these cases have, because that's what we deal with. We deal with the victims that are reluctant to testify, yet we know the problem exists. We have the burden of proof of proving these cases. And we also look at a way to hold folks accountable. But when I was requested to do this, it made me look in a different light about these cases. And I found it to be very disturbing in a way. I wasn't aware, though I've been a prosecutor for 19 years, I've been the district attorney for the last 3 years, I never knew exactly in numbers how many cases we have. We work the cases. I have a staff of 18 attorneys. I have a full staff of 45 folks. And I started looking at the numbers. So I want to share this with you. If we go to the next slide. What I want to first show you, in order to explain the economic impact on my office in one county, and remind yourself that there are 31 judicial districts in Tennessee. There are 95 counties. So we're looking at one county's numbers. And what we're looking at cases charged. And as all you folks, as I've listened to your stories, you know there are far more incidents of domestic violence than ever get charged. So we're looking at the things that actually get to court, that actually an officer is called, makes an arrest, and it gets in the system. So this is the tip of the iceberg. But even these numbers, I think, are eye-opening. In our Bristol General Sessions case, last year alone, we had 805 cases. In General Sessions case, we had over 1,100. And in criminal cases, we had 159 cases. So in Sullivan County, a population of 150,000 approximately, we had 2,134 cases of domestic violence. Now, when I say domestic violence, that ranges from assault all the way to murder, rape, kidnapping, all those cases associated with the victims who live in a household and are under the definition of victims of domestic violence. That's how many cases in 1 year were in our courts. Next slide. And this is an indication. Remember, I said 18 assistants, and I want to give you an idea of the resources that we use. Basically, 4 assistant district attorneys are involved in the prosecution of these cases out of 18 attorneys. So almost nearly a fourth almost of cases of my assistants are dedicated to this. We have one full-time domestic violence prosecutor. That's all she does. And she is here today. She came with me. If you'd stand up, Kaylin Render, in case, and I'm going to have contact information for her if later you want to talk to her. But that is her full-time position. She doesn't do any other kind of cases but that. In our sessions court, we have 3 assistants who spend their days, and you will find out, and I'll show you the statistic, the percentage of cases that they handle of domestic violence. And I have 2 full-time and 1 part-time victim witness coordinators. And their job, obviously, is in court, is to meet with the victims, to explain to them their rights, explain to them the process that they'll be undergoing, prepare them for testimony, to meet with them, and basically discuss the case and the circumstances of the abuse. They also take phone calls. They make sure the people are transported and brought and contacted. And they also coordinate with places like Abuse Alternatives, who we work very closely with, to try to find them counseling and to find homes. So their job is not just in the courtroom. It goes beyond the courtroom. And that's true of my assistants. They go to the scenes of crimes. Ms. Render, it's not unusual for her to be in the home of a victim, meeting them, going to the scene, meeting the family, taking phone calls on weekends when they call and they become full of anxiety. So it's hard to quantify in financial terms everything they do. But I will tell you that we dedicate that amount of personnel in my office just to domestic violence case. And what I did, I took, and the statistic that I had was that 30% of our cases, 30% of our cases in general sessions court are domestic violence. Imagine that, 30%. And so what I did, I took the salaries of the individuals that worked, I took all of the salary and benefits for Ms. Render, and then I took the other people in our office and I divided that by 30% because I didn't know any other way to quantify it. But that it comes into terms as far as taxpayer money is $190,000 because all of my positions are funded either by the county government or state government. And so my office alone in just salary, that doesn't include the cost of phone calls. It doesn't include the cost for mileage of going to visit. It doesn't include the time and effort that we do for training to law enforcement, to community groups, to abuse groups. But just in pure minimum terms of money for my office alone is $190,000. And just to show you how many courts are used, and of course we don't have a representative from the courts, but we have judges that are paid, we have court personnel, we have court reporters. I don't pay their salaries; they're not in my agency. But just to give you an idea of even if you expand beyond the district attorney's office, the monies, the economic impact that the state of Tennessee, that the taxpayers are paying, and that's a high price that we pay because of domestic abuse. That means that Sullivan County is funding 4 general sessions judges. Now, they don't handle only those cases, but a third of their cases are going to be domestic violence. And I would say in time in court, we spend more than 30% of court time on domestic violence cases. We have 2 criminal court judges who hear a substantial number of cases in criminal court, and often those are jury trials. And sometimes jury trials, for example, are murder cases that I've tried where a husband kills a wife. I spend a week in court. Again, that's not money from my department, but that again gives you an idea of the expense of a jury, the expense of subpoenas, the expense of bailiffs to keep safety, the cost of paying a court reporter, of a judge, the clerk's office, all of that. And in Bristol, which is a really unique thing in this area, Bristol dedicates 1 day per week, and Judge Watson does nothing in that day but hear domestic violence cases. We have enough cases in Bristol alone. These are just the Bristol end of cases in Sullivan County. We have enough domestic violence cases that we can fill every Wednesday, almost year-round. And the docket is nothing but domestic violence cases. And those days are the days that abuse alternatives come down, and we coordinate with them in court. And what we do is we talk to the victims, we offer them services, and we also attempt to enroll the abusers in their program. And the reason is that we want to, something that we recognized in the DA's office a few years ago by my predecessor, is that we need to quit thinking about domestic violence in traditional law enforcement criminal justice terms. One, we wanted to avoid recidivism. Have we been successful in that? No. I think everybody recognized that. But we recognized that we couldn't treat victims of domestic violence like victims of burglary, that they need a coordination with abuse alternatives. They need coordination with victim coordinators. So that day, we're spending that money and that time, which is money, doing nothing, in an average of 50 cases once a week. And that was the most eye-opening number, that and the fact that we spend 30% of our cases are spent on domestic violence. And that's what we do in that day. And if you came down to domestic violence court, if you wanted to watch, you would see this working together with abuse alternatives with our office. One, our primary goal is to hold the abusers responsible. That means to obtain a conviction, if possible, to obtain jail time, and to put them on probation where they're forced to go through a abuser program, and if they don't follow the conditions, to violate the probation and give them more time. Or also, our other part is to make the process as less traumatic for the victim as possible, and that takes time and that takes money, and to refer them to these programs and refer them to safe houses and to work with them and follow up with them. And so, again, as far as just in pure economic dollars and cents, 30% of the cases we're dedicating that amount of resources just to combat domestic violence cases. And I know we're going to have a question and answer session later, but if there are any immediate questions you all have, I'd like to take that up. But the thing I want to stress is, and I've heard questions about, do we need increased incarceration? And I know there have been, with domestic violence, there have been increases in when there's subsequent prosecutions to give people more time. And I will say that sometimes we don't charge people with a domestic violence crime. I mean, if someone rapes a spouse, Tennessee's gotten rid of the spousal immunity law. Well, if they convict and that person's injured in rape, they do get 15 to 25 years at 100%. If they murder someone and they're convicted and get a life sentence, they get 51 years and 100%. So in some of the classes of cases, they are getting what's a tantamount to an A felony or more. These are difficult cases to deal with, and I applaud all the people here that are on the other end that try to work with victims. We find it very challenging just because of the dynamics of the victims. The criminal justice system doesn't really, in my opinion, accommodate domestic victims the way they should, but we have tried to change the way we think. We've tried to change our system. We have a frontline meeting that meets with police officers and domestic violence organizations to brainstorm, to educate the community, to make services available. And sometimes we find it challenging to work with the victims. They don't trust the system. They want to go back. But we try to use resources, our time and our money, to benefit the victims, and sometimes in spite of what the victims want us to do. So I hope that helps. I hope that gives you all an idea of the dedication. And just multiply that by 31 judicial districts and 95 counties, and you'll have some idea of what goes on statewide.
I applaud you that you are making the effort that you are to not only look at it from your perspective, but to realize that the victims need other, and that you coordinate well with the others. And you rightly pointed out we don't really have the costs of the court system here today, but you did tell us how much of their time is involved. I mean, devoting a whole day to nothing else but domestic violence cases. And I do realize that, as you pointed out, if someone is murdered or if they're battered really almost to death, you can charge them and get those people away. It's the continuous ones that over the years, I think that we need to find a better way to deal with them. The studies I've seen don't give me much hope for the batterer programs, although I certainly wouldn't want to do away with them. But it is like in a lot of other crimes, sometimes the sheer threat of the long jail time or prison time that is a better way to deal with it and to make people think twice before they continue along those lines sometimes. But I do thank you very much. You made a great presentation. Do you have anything?
You mentioned the abuser programs that you use. What is your view on how well they're working, or I mean, are there best practices out there that the state could adopt that could do a better job with those programs?
I know from particularly the Abuse Alternatives Program in Bristol that they have a representative who sits in court basically with us. And I know that there have been some successes, and there are probably more failures than successes. And I think it's the kind of thing, I think just so much of this is so complicated, I think so complex, it's difficult to address. And I guess I'm old-fashioned in this sense. I think the best treatment for abusers is going to jail. And I know that doesn't work too. They get out. And the reason I say that is personal accountability. Sometimes the sting of going to jail may not stop them, may not change their mindset, but it may deter them from slapping somebody if they think they're going to have to go back to jail. It's not worth it. And I think the other thing that we hope, that we do by incarcerating people is that sometimes that gives the victims enough space away from these people with enough support systems that sometimes the hope is they can break the ties and the cycle. And obviously that's not always true. And sometimes they leave one abuser for another. And as a prosecutor, I'm not a counselor, but I mean I recognize the problem, and I think that for a long time law enforcement and prosecution took the fact, and there are a lot of people on juries that have this mindset, and that's why we do educational things. I know that's why Abuse Alternatives, these other organizations, along with the police department, do education, because there's still a mindset in East Tennessee that some of these women deserve it. They married the guy, they shacked up with the guy, they went back with the guy, they call the cops when they're bleeding, but 2 weeks later, they don't want to testify. And that's a reality. And our mindset is not to blame the victims, but I'll have to admit it's a very difficult obstacle in our criminal justice system, because the defendant didn't have to prove anything. He didn't have to testify. He didn't have to take the stand. The burden of proof is on us. And sometimes we just simply have victims who say, yes, that night he did this, and I told you that, and that night I was adamant that he be arrested, and you arrested him, but now I've thought about it. He's the breadwinner. He said he loves me. He has kids by me. He didn't mean it. It's my fault. All the classics things you've heard. And that's a very difficult obstacle. And so we try to find a way to prove the case. And we don't want to re-traumatize a victim who doesn't want to testify, but sometimes the only means of getting that conviction, the larger good, is to put the victim on. And sometimes they're incapable, sometimes they're uncooperative, sometimes they don't show up, sometimes they recant. And this is the last thing I'll tell you, that one of the best developments in the law that come along to help us, that we had a change in the rules of procedure, and this is technical stuff, but the bottom line is this, that we are now training police officers. When you go out to the scene and when the victim is hot and heavy about telling us what happened, when they're crying, when they're traumatized, they say, oh, this happened, we take a statement, we get them sign it. If they come into court and say, I lied, it wasn't true, we can now put the written statement into evidence, not just to impeach them, but as if it was testimony. And that's one of the best tools we have, and that's the thing that we're spreading to law enforcement, that we can use that to help us. And again, the law enforcement's here today, and they're going to tell you that I know that police officers spend a tremendous amount of money and time trying to round up victims, accommodating them, transporting them, and it's just part of the cost. And what, our costs are consumed by just personnel investigating, working these cases, and trying to get these people to court and trying to hold them accountable. And sometimes, despite everyone's best efforts, we can't do it. And sometimes we offer people probation rather than incarceration because we want a conviction with the hope that they will violate probation, because the facts are such that we do that. And that's the problem sometimes with mandatory sentencing, is that these defendants know that victim is probably not going to testify. And they'll say, try to convict me. And that, again, that's part of the cost. When we do incarcerate them, that runs up the cost in the jail, and the jail are overrun with people. But to me, that's a cost that the taxpayers are willing to pay. So.
That cost might offset a lot of healthcare costs and service giver costs and a lot of others. It's really, right. But I understand it's very, very difficult. Thank you so much thank you. Yes.
And this might be more for the wrap up, but I did want it from a prosecutor point of view. What are you, as far as education and training, what are you encountering with our immigrant communities? Because some of our immigrants come from cultures where it's readily acceptable for the male to beat or whatever case he would like to with the woman. Yeah. And if she is brave enough or gets out, then that's a whole nother issue because of the culture. So what are you encountering?
I've not encountered as much of that. I have seen it also in child abuse, where people, their defense will be, where we come from, we can do this to children. Or where we come from, that's not a crime. And so I think that's why it's so important that people become part of the melting process. They understand when they come to this country that they come here for a reason. They come here because they think this is a better place where they live. So I think we have to educate them that when they come here, that they're in a new culture and they have to live by the standards of this country. And I have an old-fashioned view about that. Somebody told me about a DUI, an immigrant, and said, well, in their country that was legal. And I said, well, you're in the United States, you're driving an American car on an American road, and by God, we're going to prosecute you under American law. So my thought would be when an immigrant, they come, and if a man abuses his wife, and I don't completely buy that. I think there may be cultures that don't afford women as many rights and children as many rights, but I think every country, every culture recognizes that you don't beat women. You don't beat women. You don't abuse women. They may have different standards about a woman's role that's different than ours, but I think when you come to this country, that I don't accept defense that our culture allows it, because one, I don't always believe that cultures do that. I think that most cultures do, to some level, respect women. And I think, though I do think that when people come, that educational efforts to the woman to say, look, your husband may be telling you that this is the way it was in the other country that we came from, but in America you have rights and privileges, and we have a fair system that will hold your husband accountable. And we have resources to help you. It's not just, we're not wanting to punish you because you come from another country. We want to help you. You came to this country because you wanted what America affords you. And I think then we afford that training, those benefits, and that education. But it can be an impediment. But I think ultimately, I don't care where they come from, if they're slapping and raping a woman or beating her up, then I think we have to hold them accountable. We can't allow cultural differences or arguments of culture to deter us from doing it. We just have to say, you come to this country and you accept the rule of law in the United States, and you'll pay for it. But if you're the victim, we want to do everything to let you know that in America, you're not required to take that.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that. Now, do we...
culture to deter us from doing it. We just have to say, you come to this country and you accept the rule of law in the United States, and you'll pay for it. But if you're the victim, we want to do everything to let you know that in America, you're not required to take that.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that. Now, do we...